Hi class. I'm giving a quick lecture about APA. I have another video on APA in the course resources, but it is set for APA 6.0 instead of 7.0, which is the new style that we're using now. So I'm going to go over this OWL PowerPoint. OWL is a Purdue University writing center, and they have an APA guide. And I suggest that if you don't buy the manual itself, you definitely should be using this guide and checking your work for your citations and your references to be sure that they are correct. If you're going to, anytime you're talking about research, academic research, you must include APA and learn how to use APA properly. So it is an important part of this class. I did suggest that people go ahead and get the manual. It is really the best thing to have the book right in your house. You can reference it anytime. Anybody planning to go further on in their education, maybe get a master's degree, you're going to need to know APA. So it's a good thing to have around because it is the most common style used in most fields. History tends to use Chicago style and English uses MLA, but for most other social sciences, they use APA. So I'm going to go through some of these slides very quickly. Some of them I'll take a little more time on because they're really, I want you to get the basics of APA. If you want to learn more about these other things, you can read about them in the manual. So one of the things that APA is encouraging now is if you are talking about something you are going to do or something that you did. So when you start writing your research methods paper later in class, you're going to use first person to talk about what you will be doing. So I plan to conduct a experiment, or I plan to do a survey. You can use I in that way. Don't use the authors or the author or this researcher or anything like that. Use personal pronouns for that. You can also use first person pronouns whenever you're talking about a reflection of your own life. So that's important to know that. Otherwise, use third person, and that's for any time you're talking about other people's research and trying to stay as professional and academic as possible. So it's best to use active voice when stressing the actions of research. So active voice is saying, I did this, we did this. Whereas you can use passive voice when it's not the object of the action that you're stressing, but something else. So the tests were inconclusive. We found the test inconclusive would be using active voice, but that wouldn't be right in this situation. So again, when you're using third person, you're often going to be putting that in the past tense. APA papers need to be clear, concise, and plain. You want to be using descriptive adjectives, simple words, be as concise as possible, and be clear in what you're saying. So you may see that from time to time that I may comment on your paper that it wasn't clear or that you didn't make a point. And sometimes people talk around their points because they have the point in their head, but then they don't actually translate that into writing about it on paper. So just a quick review, quantitative articles, they're going to be analyzing numbers. It's statistical. A typical quantitative article is going to have a title page, abstract, introduction, methods, results, and discussion. If your articles that you're using for your class papers do not have a methods section, they are not qualitative, peer-reviewed journal articles, and that's what you're going to be looking for in class. We don't want dissertations. You don't want news magazine articles or commentary or book reviews. You definitely want to be pulling methodological articles. Same is true in qualitative. Qualitative research is really used when the experiences cannot be numerically qualified. It usually is a smaller sample size, but you'll see that pretty much the way that it's set up is very similar to the quantitative. The main difference is you have findings for qualitative research and you tend to have results for quantitative. Oops, sorry about that. Moving the slides. A literature review is a summary of the research, and all journal articles are going to have a literature review at the beginning of them. It's a great way to see what's going on in a field, and it's a great way for you to look for other articles that you might want to read or use in this class. What you're doing in this class is basically building a research proposal, and your literature review is going to come from 3 articles that you examine throughout class. You're going to pull parts of those in to become your literature review section. So APA is always double-spaced with 1-inch margins, 12-point font, usually New Times Roman, and it should be printed on standard 8.5 by 11 paper if you're printing it out. In the top of your paper now, we do not use a running header anymore. Instead, you use if it's a professional paper, you put in the name of the paper and then the page number. Student papers do not require the name of the paper in the headings anymore. So there's a difference now between professional papers and student papers. So what you're doing in class now are going to be student papers, so you don't need to have this title area here. You just need the page number. Essays typically include a title page, abstract, main body, and then references. For this class, you will not need to do abstracts, but you will want to have a title page, the main body, and your references. Let's see. So this is a student paper. This is a title page. If you want to learn more about this, you can go and see a sample student paper on the OWL website, or if you have your manual, it's a sample student paper is in your manual. So look at the guidelines for sample student papers. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about citations and references, because that's really what I'm seeing that some of you are struggling with. Anytime you use a work of another author, then you must cite it. Now, it's best to summarize that work, but even with a summary, you still actually want to cite the summary. So you've got to be sure that no matter if it's a quote or a citation, that you're citing it, and there's a special way to do that. So let's talk about references first, though. References are formatted in a certain way, and that's the way it's done. It's kind of like it has 4 main parts. You have the authors in the front, you have the year, you have the title of the work, and then you have the 4th part is where can you find that work. In the case of a journal article that you see here, you have the authors in the front, and then you have the year, and then you have the title. And the title is not all caps. You only capitalize the first word or the first word after any punctuation, like a colon. Then you put the journal name, and that should be italicized, the journal volume and the journal issue, and the page numbers of the article. That's a typical APA reference for a journal article, and that's what I'm going to expect to see for all of your journal articles. Skip that. I'm going to skip that. So one of the things to note is there are 2 types of citations. There are parenthetical and narrative citations. A parenthetical citation is when you say what you read or give a summary of what you read, and then you put the author at the end of the sentence, the author, the year, and you only use the page number if it's a direct quote. So do not use a page number if you're not doing a direct quote. If you're just doing a summary, you don't need the page. Whereas with a narrative citation, the person's name goes at the front, and you're talking about that. So Atkins suggests, Atkins argues, Atkins claims that, and that's what you would do for that. And then if it is a direct quote, you put the page number at the end of the sentence. But you always keep the year with the author. Let's see, that's the same thing. So this is just basically showing you what it looks like if you are doing quotes. If you have multiple authors, it's important to note one thing. If you do a parenthetical citation, you use the ampersand sign. You also use the ampersand sign in all of your references. However, if you do the narrative citation, where you use the names of the authors and in the sentence, then you do not use the word and, because you're writing out a sentence, and that's called a narrative citation. So that's what you would do with that. You do want to introduce the author's work, whether it's a quote or whether it is a summary. You still want to explain, if you're going to use the author's name, what is it that you're doing. So if you're using the author's name in the sentence, then you need to somehow introduce it. So according to Reynolds 2019, or Reynolds 2019 argued, you can say acknowledged, contended, maintained, responded, reported, concluded. These are all words that you can use in order to discuss an author in a sentence. If you have if two authors actually say the same thing and both agree, you can cite both of them as long as both of them agree with what you're citing. So don't put together two authors' ideas and then cite them both at the end. That's not correct. But if two authors say the exact same thing, or imply the same thing, then you can cite them at the end of the sentence. So this is the and the ampersand that we talked about. Now, according to APA 7.0, if you have more than two authors, so 3 or more authors, then you just put et al. In the citation. The first time you use it, every time you use it. So you can just put et al., and that means and more in Latin, and you put a period and then a comma and then the year, or in this case you put a period and then the year. So et al. Always has a period after the AL because that's an abbreviation. If you don't know the author of a work, which won't really happen for you because you're using journal articles, but in the case if you're ever using a periodical article, like from a newspaper article or magazine article or something off the internet, you may not actually have an author. And so you would use the title of the work, but that's the only time you use the title of the work, not any other way. Okay. That one, that one, that one. Okay, headings. Headings are really important. And the reason headings are very important is because they organize your work and they let your professor or your reader know exactly what point you're talking about at what place in the work. APA has 5 different levels. We're typically only going to use level 1 and 2. It's only for very long works, 20 pages or more, that you might use a level 3, and you almost never use 4 and 5. So all headings should be centered and bold. If you are breaking up your text, like if you have a main heading and then you're going to have subheadings, then it's left and bold. And so keep that in mind. Most of the work you're going to be doing, you're just going to have main headings in there because that's how it's going to work. This is just an example of that. Tables, figures, they're all now formatted the same way, but you won't have any of those in this class, so you probably don't need to worry about that. All right, so this OWL at Purdue, you can see the website here. APA has a website, apastyle.org, where you can often see questions answered and ways to format things as well. So again, this was just a short, quick video, but I do expect citations and references for all the work you're doing in this class. And you will be graded more heavily on your APA use as class goes on. So be sure to note that as you're doing your work. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.